A crate of medicine leaves a factory outside Delhi, bound for a pharmacy shelf in Tashkent. As the crow flies, that's about 1,000 kilometers. Instead, it travels more than 5,000 kilometers. It goes the wrong way first, south to the sea, across the Arabian Sea to Iran, overland to the Caspian. It can take a month. By the time it arrives, Chinese and Turkish goods are already on the shelf. For 10 years, India had a plan to fix this. A port in Iran called Chabahar. A railway, a corridor that would cut the journey in half and finally give India a backdoor to the region it shares 2,000 years of history with. In April 2026, India quietly walked away from it. The barrier here was never really the mountains, it was the borders and the choices behind them. This is the story of how the world's largest democracy ended up locked out of a region it once ruled, and why in 2026, the last door just slammed shut. I'm Bruce Pannier. I spent 4 decades covering the former Soviet Union. This is Turan Research Center, hosted by the Yorktown Institute, where we break down the geopolitics of Turkey, Iran, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. If you're new here and want more analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get into it.
भारत और सेंट्रल एशिया देशों के डिप्लोमेटिक संबंधों ने
To understand what India lost, you have to understand what India once had. For most of recorded history, there was no wall between the subcontinent and Central Asia. There was a road. Caravans moved through the passes of the Hindu Kush, linking the plains of the Ganges to the oasis cities of Bactria, to Samarkand, to Bukhara, names that still carry weight of the empire. 3 kinds of people made that journey again and again for 2,000 years. First, the monks. Buddhism was born in India and traveled north, out through Central Asia and on to China, carried by Indian teachers and Central Asian translators. The faith that would define half of Asia moved along these routes. Then the merchants. Horses came south into India, textiles, indigo, and spices moved north. Cities like Multan and Lahore grew rich as the gateways where the subcontinent met the steppe. And then the monarchs, and this is the part that matters most for a channel called Turan. The dynasty that ruled India for 3 centuries, the Mughals, was not Indian in origin, it was Central Asian. Babur, who founded the empire in 1526, was a prince from the Fergana Valley in what today is Uzbekistan, a descendant of Timur and through him of Genghis Khan. He was driven out of Samarkand as a young man, came down through the passes and conquered the north of India. And by his own account, he never stopped longing for the gardens of his lost homeland. The Mughals had a name for that homeland. They called it Turan. So when people talk about India and Central Asia as natural partners, this isn't romantic nostalgia. The two were bound by faith, by trade, and by blood for 2 millennia. And then, in 1947, that ended almost overnight. Partition created a new state, Pakistan, directly across the only land route India had ever used to reach Central Asia. The road that had carried monks, merchants, and monarchs for 2,000 years didn't close because of geography, it closed because of a border. On paper, the case for reconnecting is overwhelming. Central Asia is rich in exactly what India needs: hydrocarbons, uranium, fertilizer. India produces exactly what the region lacks: affordable pharmaceuticals, machinery, IT services. Resources flowing one way, finished goods the other. It should be one of the most natural trade relationships on the continent. In reality, it barely exists. India's total trade with all 5 Central Asian republics is roughly $2 billion. For an economy this size, with this history, those numbers are almost absurdly small.
India has been, it has launched several initiatives to connect more with Central Asia, but there is a major problem, and that is of connectivity.
And here's the part that proves the point. Where connectivity exists, the trade is already there. Since 2015, Kazakhstan has supplied India with over 5,000 metric tons of uranium under a long-term contract. India's generic medicines already dominate parts of the Uzbek and Tajik markets. These two, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, are the engines of the region, the middle powers with the resources and the ambition that matter to India. The demand is real, the supply is real, the willingness on both sides is real. What's missing is the road. India has exactly 3 ways to reach Central Asia by land. 2 of them are closed, and the third is a detour. Door number 1 runs through Pakistan and Afghanistan, the historic route. Pakistan does not permit Indian cargo to cross its territory. Full stop.
The fact that there is conflict and dispute on this issue of Jammu and Kashmir, it has continued to affect the relationship between Pakistan and India.
And a year after the 2025 India-Pakistan war, that door is, if anything, more firmly shut. The ceasefire holds, but tensions remain high. Transit stays blocked, and India has still not reinstated the treaty governing the rivers the two countries share. This is the border the piece this video is based on calls a chosen one, a wall maintained by politics, not nature.
Problem with Pakistan that even if India wants to negotiate a deal with Pakistan, it is not clear with whom we should be negotiating, whether India should be negotiating with the Pakistani military or whether it should be negotiating with the Pakistani political establishment, because we know that it is the Pakistani military, which is which drives the whole country there.
Door number 2 runs through China. In theory, old routes once connected Ladakh to Xinjiang. In practice, the territory they crossed, Aksai Chin, is disputed. India claims it, China controls it, and Beijing has no interest in handing its rival a shortcut into a region it considers its own backyard. China built Xinjiang as its controlled gateway to Central Asia. Granting India transit would simply give away that advantage.
It's a strategically important corridor for China, and until and unless the border issues are settled and there is a fundamental change in relationship between India and China, China will not be providing that route. So what India has to do is that it was moving through Chabahar Port through Iran.
So that leaves door number 3, the long way around. A shipment that could travel just over 1,000 kilometers instead travels more than 5,000. Through Iran, across the Caspian, freight costs run an estimated 30 to 40% higher. Delivery times often double. By the time Indian goods arrive, Chinese or Turkish products already stock the shelf. The gap this creates is staggering. Between 2018 and 2023, China's trade with Central Asia climbed from around $40 billion towards $70 billion. India stayed flat at about 2. Same region, same opportunity, but Beijing built the roads, the railways, and the pipelines, and India was left a distant friend with no physical reach. India did not accept this quietly.
There is another cooperation, areas of cooperation like energy, like digital cooperation in digital area, and also cooperation in education, in some scientific research, even during my stay in India, we discussed the cooperation in space area. So that's why there are some other areas of cooperation which are not depending only on connectivity.
For 2 decades, it tried to engineer its way around the Pakistan wall. The centerpiece was Chabahar, a port on Iran's southern coast that lets India reach Afghanistan and Central Asia by sea, completely bypassing Pakistan. In 2024, India signed a 10-year contract to operate a terminal there and put in over $120 million. Chabahar was meant to plug into something bigger, the International North-South Transport Corridor, a multimodal route stretching from India to Iran, the Caspian, and on to Central Asia and Russia. And it was starting to move. In early 2025, India shipped its first cargo along the corridor's eastern branch, from Gujarat through Iran's Bandar Abbas port into Kazakhstan. For a time, you could squint and see it, a functioning Indian route to Central Asia that didn't depend on Pakistan's permission.
So it's 2,300 kilometers from Aktau seaport to Bandar Abbas. There is a railway already, existing railway, and half of it completely new through Kazakh territory and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan territory. But you know that, and it takes about a week to bring the goods from Bandar Abbas to Kazakhstan and to Turkmenistan, even less, and to other regions, because Uzbekistan and other states of Central Asia, they could use this route. It's still very close to all of these countries.
The piece of the puzzle that would have made it real was a single railway, the line connecting Chabahar to Zahedan, deep inside Iran, to be commissioned in 2026. That railway and everything riding on it is now in serious doubt. In the span of about 8 months, the entire workaround came apart.
The US Department of Treasury had issued a letter outlining the guidance on the conditional sanctions waiver, which is valid till 26th April 2026.
It started in Washington. In September 2025, the United States revoked the sanctions waiver that had let India operate at Chabahar since 2018. It granted a short extension to wind things down, and that extension expired on 26th of April 2026.
Does India even have a choice anymore?
India is quietly stepping back.
India's response tells you how serious this is. Rather than risk American sanctions, India pulled its personnel out of Chabahar, prepaid its financial commitment, and began arranging to hand its stake in the terminal up to a local Iranian entity.
So there's bombardment also which has happened on Chabahar Port, but India has not been forced out of Chabahar because the United States itself had earlier recognized Chabahar's importance for Afghanistan by providing sanction waivers. But the challenge today is primarily uncertainty surrounding Iran, changing regional geopolitics, and difficulty in financing the infrastructure.
After a decade and $120 million, India is engineering its own exit, keeping the door open only to walk back through it if sanctions are ever lifted. And then came the war. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran, a campaign we've covered in depth on this channel. Iran's future is now an open question. The Strait of Hormuz was thrown into crisis, and the railway that was supposed to complete India's corridor faces what analysts now expect to be indefinite delays. Here's the trap India is caught in, and it's brutal in its logic. If the Iranian regime survives this war, it stays under sanctions, and India can't build through a sanctioned country without Washington's blessing. If Iran loses, the sanctions may eventually lift, but the winners, not India, will be the ones who decide who gets to build what. Either way, the Iran route, the one workaround India spent 20 years and a fortune constructing, is for now a dead end. The corridor through other people's territory turned out to depend on other people's wars.
India is now therefore pursuing diversification rather than kind of abandonment. It is simultaneously investing in India-Middle East economic corridors, strengthening maritime connectivity, exploring the international North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, and expanding relations with the Central Asian countries directly also.
There's a second project that captures this whole story in miniature, TAPI, a gas pipeline meant to carry Turkmen gas through Afghanistan and Pakistan to India. It was conceived in the 1990s. More than 30 years later, the gas still hasn't reached India. Now, credit where it's due, and this is an update worth making. The Afghan section is finally physically moving. By mid-2026, construction in Herat province had passed the halfway mark, with officials targeting the city of Herat by year's end. But look closely at what's actually being built. It's a scaled-down line reaching only as far as Herat. Financing for the full route remains unsecured, and the part that matters to India, the stretch that crosses Pakistan, is as distant as it's ever been.
There is an issue of stabilization in Pakistan, and there is an issue of India-Pakistan tensions. So even if Afghanistan stabilizes and India-Pakistan tensions will continue to create long-term uncertainty. And no energy company wants to invest billions in infrastructure whose operation depends upon two hostile nuclear neighbors maintaining the stable relations. So that's why TAPI has remained more of a strategic vision than as an operational reality for several decades.
Even if it were built, I'd urge real caution about what it would mean. A pipeline that runs through Turkmenistan through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, into India isn't just infrastructure, it's leverage. If fighting flares between Pakistan and India, or between Pakistan and Afghanistan, there's a very real chance the gas simply stops at the border. A project sold as a tool for regional trust could as easily become a tool for regional blackmail. 30 years on, TAPI isn't a monument to connectivity. It's a monument to how little trust there isn't to build on.
TAPI, this is the multilateral project, which depends only not on Indian and Pakistani relations, also on situation in Afghanistan, safety, of infrastructure, logics of economy, and readiness of all parties to this project to create some long-term conditions for the project.
Dear friends.
That's great.
What a pleasure.
Hello.
So where does India turn? Right now, the entire conversation has shifted to one project, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. Through Arabia, across to Europe, and in January 2026, India and the European Union concluded a long-awaited free trade agreement, giving the route powerful economic logic. The headlines call it India's answer, the corridor that finally breaks the country out of its geographic cage. And it might be for trade with Europe. But here's what almost no one is saying out loud. IMEC goes west. It connects India to the Gulf and to Europe. It does not go to Central Asia. It doesn't touch Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or any of the 5 republics. For the specific problem this video is about, India's access to its own historic neighborhood, IMEC solved nothing. And even on its own terms, IMEC is far from real. As of mid-2026, there are no firm funding commitments and no construction timeline. Its success depends on Gulf stability and on Saudi-Israeli normalization, both of which the Iran war has thrown into doubt.
However, indirectly, it could strengthen India's logistics ecosystem. We'll have better ports, faster shipping, improved Gulf connectivity, and stronger economic integration with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and that could eventually support broader regional trade. So this would benefit the Central Asian region also, but IMEC is not a substitute for Central Asian access. However, it can become a very important supporting pillar for the Central Asian trade.
So the uncomfortable truth is this. India's pivot to IMEC is real, but it's a pivot to a different destination. The road to Central Asia is still blocked. Arguably, with Iran in flames and Chabahar abandoned, it's more blocked than it was a year ago. The price India pays for all this isn't just measured in dollars or lost trade, though that runs into the billions every year. It's measured in influence. Central Asia could have been India's strategic depth, a counterweight in its long contest with China. Instead, year by year, it becomes Beijing's economic backyard.
The challenge is not demand. The challenge is connectivity. Without affordable and predictable transport, which remains the biggest challenge, even the strongest political goodwill cannot fully translate into trade. So it is not that India is not willing. India is willing, but the challenge is affordable and predictable transport.
And I want to be precise here because it's easy to cast the Central Asian states as passive prizes in someone else's game. They're not. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are middle powers, running deliberate, multi-vector foreign policies. They welcome India, its medicines, its training programs, its diplomacy, precisely because it gives them another option, another counterweight against leaning too far toward Moscow or Beijing. But welcome and dependent are different things. When the infrastructure that actually moves goods runs through China and the back door through Iran has just been sealed, the region's choices make themselves. India remains a friend in the room and an absent partner in the market. Every year that gap stays open, new dependencies harden and they get harder to unwind.
So there are too many geopolitical challenges which India has to traverse through, and there are not many options which India has. So that remains as coming. It's kind of at the cost or at the risk of being repetitive. So it is the geography or it is the connectivity which is stopping India or which is kind of checking Indian efforts to increase its presence in Central Asia.
Step back and the shape of it is clear. India is not walled off from Central Asia by the Himalayas. The mountains have passes, caravans crossed them for 2,000 years. India is walled off by borders that politics drew and politics maintain. A closed frontier with Pakistan, the frozen dispute with China, and now a war-shadowed Iran that has swallowed the one detour India spent decades digging. The cruel irony is that the connection was never the problem. Faith, trade, and dynasty once flowed freely across this space. A Central Asian prince founded the empire that ruled India for 300 years and called his lost homeland Turan. What broke that world wasn't distance, it was the modern map. And the contest this creates is about much more than pipelines and ports. It's about whose vision of connectivity defines Eurasia in this century. Whose rules, whose partners, whose roads. For now, India can see Central Asia on every map. It simply cannot reach it. And in 2026, the last usable road just closed. Thanks for watching. This video is based on an analysis by Arun Anand for the Turan Research Center. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to read the full piece. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. And let me know in the comments, if every land route runs through a rival, Pakistan, China, or an Iran at war, does India have any path to Central Asia that doesn't depend on someone else's permission? Or has the door closed for a generation?